You're in the water loop.
Waterloop is made possible in part by grants from Spring Point Partners and the Walton Family Foundation.
Waterloop.
Hi, this is Travis with Waterloop. Water conservation is very important to me, and I bet it is to all of you. That's why I use High Sierra shower heads in my house, and I'm so happy to have them as a supporter of this podcast. High Sierra carries the EPA WaterSense label for efficiency and uses 40% less water than conventional low-flow shower heads. 40%. The model I have uses just 1.5 gallons per minute. And because of their unique nozzle design, it's patented. Nobody else has it. It maximizes efficiency of water and energy use, but doesn't sacrifice on performance. You still get a powerful shower. Use promo code LOOP20 for 20% off at highsierrashowerheads.com.
Waterloop.
The Waterloop podcast is sponsored by Flume. It's the perfect device for tracking your home's water use in real time on your smartphone. It's so easy to use. You just attach a small device to your water meter using a band, the same way you put a watch on your wrist. Then you connect to Wi-Fi, you download the app, and you're up and running. It's as simple as that. You don't need a plumber. You don't need to cut into any of your pipes or water lines. Very easy to set up. Then you can set water budgets, how much you want to use each day or week. It'll keep track of that. It'll tell you what's going on in your house with water use minute by minute. It'll send alerts to you if there's excessive water use or if it suspects a leak. In fact, when I installed Flume at my house, it told me almost right away about a leak. I was losing 1 gallon of water every 6 minutes. I'm honestly not sure when I would have found that without Flume. You can use promo code WATERLOOP for 10% off at flumewater.com.
You're in the water loop.
Welcome to Waterloop. This is Travis. As you can see on screen here, for those of you watching, I've got 3 guests with me. We are going to talk about the Flint lead crisis, specifically about the process of replacing lead lines and how that's gone from a technical standpoint, from a community outreach standpoint. Very excited to have these 3 folks who've been very involved in Flint. I have Ben Pauli. He is assistant professor of social science at Kettering University. Ben, so glad you're on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Jared Webb, chief data scientist with BlueConduit. Jared, thanks for joining.
My pleasure.
And Mona Munroe-Yousif, Executive Director of the Environmental Transformation Movement of Flint. Mona, happy to have you as well.
Thank you. Hi, everybody.
Great. Well, I really am looking forward to digging into this and hearing about the experiences you all had and the lessons learned when it comes to actually getting those lead lines out of the ground and better protecting the residents of Flint by doing that. I know that it's been a crazy journey for you all. For a long time, a lot of emotions involved, a lot of challenges, a lot of frustrations. So I appreciate what you all have been through. Want to acknowledge that for sure. Could we talk about when this process started of replacing lead lines? What were the challenges that were known from the start and that were discovered along the way?
Yeah, sure. So I'll take that, and Ben and Mona, please chime in when I forget to mention something important. So I think the very first challenge before anything was knowing which houses had lead pipes and which ones did not. And this is something that before I became involved, I didn't really know what a water service line was before I started working in Flint, and much less that people might not know like where they are or what they're made out of. So I was working at the University of Michigan at the time, and we found out that, the people working in Flint were running into trouble not knowing about which houses had lead pipes and which ones had copper pipes. And so this is the primary challenge, that Flint had an amount of funding to replace service lines, but they didn't have enough to go to every single house. And it certainly isn't a good look if you spend all of your time digging up copper pipes and then filling the hole back in again. That's not addressing the problem, and it's really going to cause further emotional damage to the population if they see that progress isn't being made. So I think that was the first real issue. Flint had, when they reached out to us, I think they had no records, period, of which houses had lead pipes and which ones didn't. And eventually, I don't know the whole story behind this, but someone found some hand-drawn maps in a basement in a city building somewhere in a locked cabinet that had been forgotten. It was dusty, and they pulled these out. And
40,000 index cards with
there was index cards, and there were these maps. They were actually kind of beautiful how they were drawn by craftsmen. But all this information was digitized by a team of undergrads headed by Dr. Kaufman at the University of Michigan, Flint. And that was like the first draft of saying, okay, this is where we think there might be lead, this is where there might not be. And as this process bore itself out, it actually turned up being that those records were wrong about as often as they were right. And so even though we had these things saying, well, this house, this map from who knows when says there's a lead pipe there, we dig it up, it's actually copper. Or vice versa, they go dig up a location and it says copper on these maps and it's actually a lead pipe. And so this created kind of this information crisis in Flint that we had to work on solving first. And that's where we at the time University of Michigan came in. We were data scientists, but we had no experience. We weren't civil engineers. We certainly didn't have any of this experience that like Ben and Mona have dealing with the communities of Flint. But we took the information that was available, including those records that were wrong, and turned them into a data science pipeline, a machine learning model that could predict which houses had lead pipes and which ones had copper pipes, so that you're not spending time digging holes that you don't have to dig, shutting down streets you don't have to shut down, and wasting money digging where you shouldn't be digging. And these models eventually became highly accurate, and at first we were using them with the city and cooperating, eventually we wanted to kind of figure out how we can work more with the community. And I don't know if Ben or Mona, if there's anything you want to add into this point. Like we built the model, we made some predictions, and we kind of succeeded as academics. But there was like we succeeded as like the nerds, I guess. But there's a human side, a community side to this that we were not really super well equipped to deal with, and I think that's where Ben and Mona come in.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Jared though. So the reason this model worked is because you guys were able to see what types of lines were prevalent in a certain area, and then the model could predict, well, this neighborhood or this street probably has this based on what else is around there.
Yeah, that's a great question. So what is the input to the model, right? And we took any information we could find out about the houses and the building stock in Flint. We took like property tax records. We looked at where they are located within the city. Like we looked at even things that you might not think of, like the nearest fire hydrant type. This Flint has different fire hydrants types that got put in at different times in its history. As infrastructure got built out, different kinds of fire hydrants got put in. And it turns out that looking at the nearest fire hydrant type for each house was helpful for predicting this. And the other thing, I got to really credit the city, or at least the people we were working with. We really stressed from the beginning how important it was to take a random sample of the homes in Flint and say, we don't want to just train models on houses in this spot. We want to take a random sample of all the houses in Flint. Let's go look at the pipes at these, we'll say 200 houses, and have that be representative of the whole city, so that we're not just prioritizing where the best records are. if we prioritize where the best records are, you run into all sorts of equity and bias issues. Bias in the statistical sense, and then bias in the more vernacular sense, where people say that algorithms can be biased towards certain populations. So we stressed that from the beginning to get these random samples to train our models. And the city acceded to that. They, General Michael McDaniel, who was kind of heading the process at the time, got it. And he went out and he did it. And you were able to use those samples to train these models. And those models, those samples, we connected to these things I mentioned earlier, these features about the houses and the housing stock, and anything we could get our hands on, we shoved it into the model to see what the model could figure out. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. I'd love to hear any other perspective on challenges in the lead line replacement that were kind of, as this effort was getting underway, that were apparent, that were going to have to be overcome to be successful.
Well, I could speak a little bit about that. So, in order to, the interpretation of the law in Flint was that in order to change a lead line or even scope to see what the lead line was composed of, the property owner would have to give permission. And so one of the, alongside the data side and the science side that was driving this work was an effort going door to door. In Flint's contractors, by and large, were doing this, especially at the beginning. Going door to door, starting with the neighborhoods where they wanted to do the lead line replacement first and trying to get people's permission. And there were a whole lot of community questions and concerns about this. For a lot of people, I think those got resolved and people were happy to have the lead line scoped and replaced, and other people still have reservations because the entity carrying out this work, even though it was done by contractors, it's not, is one that we've had we're rebuilding trust with, right? Mm-hmm. And even, to the extent that the state or other actors were trying to support this work, again, there's a trust factor involved. So that is part of why I think it became very important for organizations like the Healthy Flint Research Coordinating Center, grassroots organizations, Flint Neighborhoods United, neighborhood level groups to really be talking with neighbors, explaining the process, getting knowledgeable people about the process in front of residents to have their questions answered proactively. And there was also an effort. There's this whole organization that formed called I think it was FACT. Was it FACT?
Fast Start.
Fast Start. Well, it was. Yeah. I'm just thinking of it was the Flint Recovery Group, and then Flint Cares. I'm sorry, Flint Cares, and within that, there was a communications work group that formed in order to make sure that the information getting out to the community was vetted, accurate, accessible, multilingual, accessible for the deaf and hard of hearing community, making sure basically nobody was going to be missed, because especially at the start of the crisis, there were populations in Flint that just were not getting information, were not being listened to, and so. And also just, how the importance of having accurate information in order to make healthy decisions for yourself and your family. So there was an effort within that group, and I participated in the communications work group, to make sure that any materials that the contractors were giving out to residents were vetted through this group, but also that we talked about creating a script. I think we'd actually mocked up a script for them, because if you're used to doing pipe replacement, but you're not used to talking to people about what that means for them, what is the service line, right? There's a language barrier. What is it? We had to become mini scientists, and not really in a way, right? Like,
sure.
Understand water system lingo in order to keep up with the information. And so so that is some of the grassroots work and community organization work that came to, people coming together to make sure that this was going to roll out to the community as efficiently, as effectively as possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I can just add one more quick thing to that. I mean,
Yeah,
so there's a problem of data where the lead lines are to begin with. But then even if you know where the lead lines are, you've still got some decisions to make about how to go about replacing them, who you're going to prioritize.
I'm glad you're talking about that, because I wanted to hear also. I mean, I think we heard some good stuff from Jared about the technical challenges, and from Mona about the outreach. I was curious, what was the overall approach? What was the thinking of, like, okay, here's how we're going to tackle this strategically?
Yeah, so I mean, back in 2016, when the service line replacement process started getting underway, and when I personally became involved in the response to the crisis, I had a colleague. I have a colleague at Kettering, Dr. Laura Sullivan, who was really interested in trying to put together a kind of resident advisory board that would be helping to make exactly these kinds of decisions about which homes to prioritize. And her thinking was that it could be the community basically deciding what principles should inform those priorities. So let's say you've got homes where you have especially vulnerable residents, like say you have young children. Might it be the case that we could prioritize those homes, right? So there were any number of considerations that might have factored into that. But, we really never had a group like that came together. Instead, we had people on the city side and people who were involved with this group that was put together by the governor at that time, Rick Snyder, to oversee the recovery effort, who were more or less making those kinds of decisions on behalf of the community. And there were some great people who were involved in that effort who I think were trying their best to do this efficiently and well and with respect for residents. But, one of the things you find is that sometimes people on the technical official side, even if they're trying to do good work, right, their perspectives and their considerations and priorities don't always match up with those of people on the ground. And so, one of the things that we saw starting to happen with that pipe replacement process was a kind of tug of war between people who were kind of trying to do it as efficiently as possible and people who were kind of trying to direct resources towards particular parts of the city. And so, if you can imagine what this looked like from a resident perspective, we had some parts of the city that, weren't at the top of the priority list at that time, who were looking around and seeing other people get their pipes replaced and saying, well, wait a minute, what about us over here? And I don't think that everybody really understood how those determinations were being made. And that was part of the problem from the beginning. So that generated mistrust, that generated discontent, that generated fears that there were going to be people or even whole parts of the city that kind of fell through the cracks or were pushed all the way down to the bottom of the queue. And so, to some extent, it became a political issue because I think from the perspective of the administration at that time, we have a ward-based system of city government in Flint, right? So we have council members who represent different wards of the city. And, obviously they're supposed to be thinking about what's good for the city as a whole. But on the other hand, they're getting elected by people in particular parts of the city. And they need to be able to show their constituents that they're taking their concerns seriously. And so I think to some extent that helped to kind of spread the replacements around, especially in the year 2018, where things were done very inefficiently. Because, again, we had this kind of conflict between these sort of, you could call them political rationales or just rationales that are coming out of the community to some extent with the kind of technical efficiency considerations. And so that's a kind of balance that I think, is going to have to be struck in any community that is doing this work. And there's no, one right objective answer to where you draw that line between those priorities. But it is important that people feel like their voices are being heard when those determinations are being made.
Did it settle in at some point to, a path forward, an approach that then hit a rhythm and momentum could get behind it? Like it did it come to that, or did it just kind of evolve throughout the whole process of what the strategy was?
I would say in fits and starts. Like there's lawsuits kind of thrown into the mix here where the NRDC, on behalf of city residents, sued the city, and because they wanted to make sure that the resources were being used to actually help the residents to get the lead out. For a time, the city was using those resources well, but then Ben mentioned in 2018 there was some issues with efficiency. The city brought in some other people to manage the program. They said, "Good job, guys! You did great to getting us started. We'll take it from here." And when they took it from there, they kind of abandoned the approach that we had taken in favor of some other approach that I can't really comment on precisely, but the hit rate for finding lead in 2018 plummeted from, what we were seeing in 2016, 2017, 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10 houses that they were digging up were finding lead. And at scale too. We were doing a lot of houses. We were using the model as an input for deciding where to go, but certainly not the only thing that we cared about. And in 2018, when these other people got brought on to manage the program, the hit rate went down to like 1 in 10, maybe 1 in 20 in a lot of cases. They were digging holes in all the wrong places. They were digging them up, filling them in again, and then moving on. And this caused the NRDC to pursue further legal action in 2018. And then in 2019, a judge obligated the city to start using the model again to guide replacements as an input. And the hit rate went back up to, 60, 70, 80% of the time you were finding lead. And so
I was going to ask how the use of technology and data, changed during the process, and you just kind of spelled it out. People went away from it in a way, and that led to a lot of shortcomings in like finding lines, and very inefficient. And then when they went back to really using tech and data, it helped. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. I would say that's right. We were able to return to this regime where we were using data-driven decision-making, and the hit rate went back up. The city was using its resources to replace lead pipes, not to dig holes, right? And I see that as a success. One other side of that is, and maybe we can mention this a little bit, is we really wanted to make information which we were sharing mostly with policy people at the city or decision makers. We wanted to democratize that more, and we wanted to increase the transparency and the accountability that we could. We wanted to empower the residents to be able to act for themselves and foment for change if they needed it, if they wanted to. And so we took this information that we had been passing back and forth with, experts, we'll say, and we decided to build a map that shared everything that we knew about the service line inventory in Flint, that anyone could access at any time, and they could find out everything that we knew about it. So it wasn't just something that we'll say that the experts knew about. It's something that everyone knew about. And we worked with the community to try to develop that map so that it was not in data scientist speak, but in community speak. And, Bren and Mona both helped build that out so that it was actually useful. Other communities have service line maps, but they're usually not very good. I have a hard time understanding what all the symbology means and some of them. And I'm used to thinking statistically and algorithmically. And so we really wanted to make it really approachable to anyone in Flint. And so now if you go to flintpipemap.org, you can see a snapshot of what the actual status, as far as anyone knows anywhere, of what the service line situation is in Flint.
Great.
And a personal level. Sorry, I just wanted, if I may just really quickly add to that, I'm so glad you brought this into the conversation, because it's really been a key technological tool for us to have that data at the parcel level, to have it in Spanish and English, to have it in a format also where you can click a box and it goes to a colorblind version. That you can get information about when your lead pipe was replaced, the date, what were the findings when they dug the hole, and then if they haven't dug yet, then there's a probability scale of how likely it is that there would be lead. And I just want to give a shout out to BlueConduit for having the mentality of wanting to work with the community. It's a different way of thinking about approaching work and about partnership, and really having the really keeping the well-being of people in mind, and at the heart of the work, and then continuing to work with us as we needed to download the raw data to work with neighborhood groups to actually, reach out to neighbors that still had lead or high likelihood, or had a high likelihood of lead service line pipes, and have not yet signed up for pipe replacement. So really our work with BlueConduit was around, I think we individually had helped to inform the development of the tool, but also later, more recently, we're really working to make sure the information got out to the community. So,
yeah, well, I gotta say, you should see what the map looked like before we got the community input. It was horrible. I knew it was bad. I didn't know how to fix it necessarily. Listening to people like Mona and Ben really made it so much better. So it goes both ways. We're really glad to have worked with them.
Well, that's a bit about how the technical approach maybe changed during this process. I want to hear more about how community outreach and engagement evolved during this many years of lead line replacement.
Yeah, so I think that as I was saying before, to some extent from a resident perspective, people were just kind of watching the replacement process happen without necessarily knowing how people were making decisions on the technical side or where they were in the queue, if anybody was ever going to get to their house. And as I was saying before, that was causing some uncertainty and some distrust. Especially after the city returned to using the algorithm in order to identify and prioritize the lead lines, it started placing a lot of emphasis on residents opting in. It seems to be the case that early on they were going to a lot of homes and just kind of starting to dig, as I understand it. But in more recent years, there's really been a lot of stress on individual homeowners actually, signing a form and agreeing officially to have their yard dug up. And so precisely because that became such a priority, it became even more necessary to make sure that residents understood what was going on, to some extent, understood how they fit into it, felt maybe even some ownership of that process. This was a process that they could be fully engaged in and even influenced to some extent. And so having the map available as a tool was really important, just for starters, so that people could look up their address and see if they hadn't had a pipe replaced, they could maybe understand why that was. I mean, maybe it's because their line was confirmed to be copper, or maybe it was because they forgot to opt in, or maybe it's because, the contractors just haven't got round to them yet. So that was important, first and foremost, just for informing individual homeowners about what was going on with their particular parcel. But just because you've created a map and put it up on the internet, especially in a place like Flint, where we do have a digital divide, and sometimes it can be really hard to get the news out to the sort of extremities of the community. It's really important to do more than just that, and that's where the partnership aspect of all of this is so critical, because you could be coming in from the outside with the best ideas and the best motivations and the most resources and all of that. But at some point, you're going to hit a wall if you don't have partners on the ground that have an understanding of the community from the inside out and can help you to make use of your skills and your resources in a way that actually reflects residents' needs and priorities. And so I also want to give credit to BlueConduit for having done that. And one of the things that I liked about the way they did it is that they didn't just go to one or two of their favorite people in Flint and treat their perspectives as, representative of the community. I mean, they really tried to canvass a wide range of opinion about this stuff. And so even though some of us have collaborated with them more than others, again, they really tried to be inclusive about the way in which they did this work. But, one of the reasons, part of the value added there, again, is that once we started to understand the problem more ourselves, like on the community side, we could think, okay, how can we help to get the word out and build trust in the pipe replacements? And if you don't have people who have been on the ground for years, doing the kind of work that Mona and I do, then it can be really difficult to get the information into the right channels and make sure that people are trusting it and acting upon it appropriately. And so we started thinking about all of the different relationships that we built up within the community, especially as part of the response to the water crisis. I mean, we have a lot of groups that in one way or another have been working on water in Flint over the years and who, really appreciate having good data and good science to help them understand what's going on and where they should direct their efforts. And so we had some ideas about who needed to have a seat at that table as we talked about how to best get the word out and make sure that nobody fell through the cracks. And so Mona mentioned already, some of the groups that we reached out to, and it by no means was just us. We were talking with Flint Neighborhoods United. We were talking with people from Flint Rising and the Democracy Defense League, and we have some really great community activists here who have networks of their own, and so that's one of the important things about being able to work with other groups within the community is we know a lot of people in Flint, but we only know so many people, and everybody has their own kind of circle of influence, and this is one of these issues where I'm happy to say, we've had a lot of groups come together and really act in a concerted, unified way in order to address this problem. And so what that looked like is that we had people taking information contained in the map and then using it as a basis for outreach, identifying those homes that had not yet had their surface lines replaced, and trying to track people down. And I will tell you that one strategy that I was using in my neighborhood is I would compare the map against property records. And so if I saw a home that had been missed, or just hadn't been gotten to yet, I could figure out who owned the property. And I was finding about 50% of the time, that was somebody I either knew or they were a friend of a friend. Yeah. I could find them through social media or something like that. And and so I could, check up on them and try to get a sense of why they hadn't opted in, if they needed extra help. In some cases, I was finding that they had already done so. They were just, on the waiting list, and as well as identifying situations that, where people really did need a little bit of extra intervention and assistance in order to make this happen. And so that's the kind of thing that, again, you can't do if you're coming in from the outside without working with the community. And again, it wasn't just me, it wasn't just Mona, it was any number of people who were part of that conversation who were trying to figure out, does my neighbor need extra assistance with this? How can I check up on people and make sure that they're not falling through the cracks?
Sure. Well, I love the point there that partnerships and collaboration just became essential to getting this work moving ahead and getting to the finish line. Absolutely. I wanted to ask about kind of for BlueConduit, I guess, or all whoever wants to answer this. You know, your services using data and tech to help identify where lead lines are and get them replaced. You know, it's a business for you, right? You have a business to operate.
It is now.
Awesome.
It wasn't
Congrats.
then, but
Yeah. How do you factor in environmental justice and equity and kind of the financial landscape for these communities into your business model of identifying and replacing lead lines?
That's a really good question. That's an excellent question, and I will say that I don't have all the answers for that. So, but we're discovering them as we do this. We were just researchers when we started this. We didn't really think beyond the work that we were doing kind of as a pro bono service to the community because we wanted to help. As the work progressed and we wrote a couple of papers about this, we just eventually discovered that there actually are lots of communities with the same problem that Flint has. Flint was, it's cliche, but they're a canary in the coal mine for many towns in the Midwest facing similar things. And so as we can't, we need to be able to scale our efforts and be able to work in lots of places if we want to actually be able to deliver this service to lots of people and lots of towns. As we do that, we are actively seeking partners to. I'll say this: we view this mission as a social mission, as a part of the DNA of the company. Very much, we want to be considering this at every step of the way. We go out of our way to try to target underserved communities, and if we can't find the resources within the community to fund this work or to make it happen, we work actively with them to write a really compelling grant proposal to the EPA, saying, look, we can make an EPA an investment in this community really worth it. We can make it so much more efficient. We can identify the lead lines. We have experience now with, thanks to Ben and Mona, we have experience now with public health communication and explaining and making transparency a big part of this process. So we can make a really compelling case for, like, say, a grant saying, let's fund this effort to understand and make data-driven decisions so we're not just shooting in the dark here. Let's take these lessons learned and make it available to the community. This map that we spent all this time building in Flint, we can build the same map in other places so that residents can, and then we know how to connect with partners on the ground and incorporate those partners into the grant proposal to fund them so they can go and do this work and deliver it to the community so that people don't get left behind. We don't want to, we could, I suppose, focus only on really large water systems where there are maybe larger contracts for the company. As we don't want to say no to them, obviously, but as we do that, we want to make sure that we are putting a lot of effort into those small to medium-sized cities that in lots of ways have been left behind and lots of ways don't have anything like the resources to attack this problem in a data-driven way and make this service available to them however we can.
Sure.
And it's evolving. We're figuring out how to do this. We've had some really great partnership with the Rockefeller Foundation, who's been able to fund some of this work so that we can go to these places that just you've never heard of before and talk to them and help deliver this service to them and make it available. These high-tech tools that, you go to like a city, just pick one, like New York City. They've got a whole huge team of data scientists working at the city already. They've got this really slick data operation. And then these other cities that maybe have been passed over for development for a long time, a lot of their paper records are still on paper, right? Mm-hmm. We want to help them leverage what they have to make it as efficient as possible to help as many people as possible.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
they're also probably the communities that haven't had the benefit of infrastructure dollars, especially in smaller communities, right? If you're having to fund it yourself through tax dollars, it becomes a high cost for a small population to bear.
Yeah, absolutely. Ben, I remember you talking about some of the implications of lead line replacements on the future of properties and real estate. And could you kind of go over that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's important to understand that just because you're removing lead service lines within a community at homes where, first of all, you have inhabitants and people with active water accounts and people who have actively opted into that process, it doesn't mean that you're taking care of the problem, comprehensively. So, and so it's not just that some people have opted out. It's in Flint we have people living in homes but who are not officially connected to the grid, and so those houses are unfortunately falling through the cracks in this process. But then we also have the highest vacancy rate of any city in the whole United States, and so we have many homes that of course have their own service lines, but you don't have anybody living in them right now to opt in, and so those homes are also being missed. And so just because we've gotten the lead out of the ground in some places, it doesn't mean that we're done with the legacy of lead in Flint. And so one of the things that we want to make sure of moving forward is that we have some kind of a backstop in place for people who find out later on that they're living in a house with a lead service line. And so thankfully we now have a state law that requires communities to replace their lead lines progressively year by year. This is what we didn't get in the latest revision to the federal lead and copper rule. We do have it in place at the state of Michigan. So in theory, even people who don't get their lead lines replaced now could be taken care of later on as the city tries to comply with that law. But yeah, just in terms of thinking about the legacy of lead within the community, I mean, it's really important from a homeowner perspective to know that the home that you're living in, that you're also investing in, because as we all know, I mean, a home is a major investment for people, that home is not attached to the grid through a lead line. And so, when we've encountered resistance from residents from time to time who, don't think they need to get their line replaced or are, reluctant to participate in this process, that's been a major talking point, is that, no, this is in the interest of, you as a homeowner moving forward. And, in Flint, we already have a median home value that's, somewhere in the $25,000 range. I mean, our property values here are extremely depressed to begin with, and so it's important to recognize that as being part of the health of the community moving forward.
Yeah, I wanted to ask kind of two last questions. So, what's the status now as we sit here in January 2021 of lead lines in Flint? Aside from the vacant property issue. Occupied homes. What's it look like?
That's a great question. There have been, I want to say, around 10,000 lead pipes removed from Flint. Out of the homes that have people living in them, active water accounts, that is a rather significant chunk. We're starting to kind of run out of places to look for lead pipes. We're not done yet, and there's certainly lots of homes that there has not been any sort of verification done, homes that maybe we thought were low probability, new construction, things like this. Yeah, that's where we're at. We're still moving forward. The data still flows. Every time there's an update, we with new data, it comes to me, and we update it on the map so that it reflects the current state of things in Flint. We're trying to work with all the stakeholders. We're trying to help, finish off the legal the legal situation and making sure that the money allocated for this is still being used efficiently. But we've made a lot of progress. But I wouldn't say that we're done. And as Ben was saying, this is going to be a long-term kind of thing. I don't know, Ben, if there's anything you want to add to that. I can tell you how many pipes have been replaced, but that's where my expertise ends.
One aspect of this we haven't mentioned is that it's not just a matter of getting the pipes out of the ground. It's a matter of repairing the damage that you do when you take the pipes out. And that's not a small consideration for a lot of residents. In fact, that's been a reason why some people have cited for why they've opted out rather than opting in, is that they imagine their yard being torn up and then never fixed. And I will tell you, as somebody who got his lead service line replaced in the fall of 2017, I am still waiting for the contractors to come back and reseed the area that they dug up. It's been a muddy mess ever since then. And so, people take a lot of pride in their lawns, as they do in their homes, and so it's not just about getting pipes out of the ground. It's really about doing it the right way, and we're still waiting for that sort of thing to happen.
Sure.
I'd like to add. We can make that up next.
Right.
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead, Mona.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to add, we also have some hopes. I know that there is an interest, I think, in local government to complete this program. Obviously, we want to have as many homes made safer as quickly as possible, and these are state funds, and so you want to get them spent right efficiently. We've been also pushing to make sure that the deadline isn't arbitrary for ending the opt-in period for opting into the lead pipe replacement program, and NRDC has helped to ensure through legal means that is not an arbitrary date, that it's based on the completion of sufficient outreach to every home. But I just want to add, we do have some hopes, and I want to share them because I think it's helpful for other cities who are maybe at the beginning of this process to be planning ahead and being proactive and learning from what we've gone through in Flint, not only from the importance of partnerships and the importance of having supporting and really empowering and enabling community members to understand the science and the scientists to understand community and to work together in a very collaborative way, but also to be proactive about those things that Ben talked about in terms of like 20, 30 years out. What is the state of your housing stock and your potential for economic development by not leaving lead in the ground? So we need a strategy here to still deal with those vacant properties. You've got tens of thousands of vacant properties in Flint. And so my personal concern is that it sort of dooms a property that's going to be sold for $15,000, $20,000, and gets missed over by this program, and maybe doesn't get caught right away by efforts to comply with the updated lead and copper rule. That people might pass that property by and not wanting to invest in it because the cost of replacing the pipe alone may be $5,000. And so these are considerations people have when they think about locating in Flint. And we have had an exodus of people, understandably, leaving to protect their families. And that has had a ripple effect. And we have now, and I know the numbers aren't official yet, I think, but with the 2020 census, we expect to be under the 100,000 population mark. And what that means is that we are in a different category as a city, and that affects our ability to get grants and potentially representation in government. Hopefully that won't come. There won't be a change there. But these are unintended consequences of this water crisis. Not to mention the fact that there's a lot of questions still about the water quality. Is it stable? These are my questions. I would like to see more transparency. And before this closes, a very intentional and thoughtful strategy about the vacant lots. And I understand that there are constraints, and you, of course, want to prioritize getting lead out of those properties that are occupied. That makes complete sense, no doubt. But unfortunately, we are tied. It's easy to just go to the 2017 legal settlement that pushed for this program in the first place. And that settlement basically states that, or part of the settlement states that you have to have had an active water line since 2017 to even qualify for the pipe replacement program. Which hopefully that means is catching new people that may move into Flint. We've had some people move in too who want to be part of the change and be part of this community. This really is a beautiful community, you know, despite all these challenges. But yeah, I think we just want to be very, very intentional.
Sure. Well, my last question is, you know, especially Ben and Mona, we've talked about the lead lines but how they are right now. How are the people? You know, you've raised this point about still having questions and concerns, and that's all valid. But you know, the people have been through a tremendous amount. How are the people of Flint?
I think there's fatigue. There's fatigue from, you know, the thing about Flint is that you've had people who have been active about making change here long before the water crisis. It really is you know, Flint has been in different transitions for many decades, as GM pulled out, and, you know, you had just like this ripple effect with the tax base and then the population and investment and everything. So you have people here who stay and have a fighting spirit and a caring spirit for each other. And I think there's a sense here, more than in any other community I've lived in, that we have to take care of each other. So I think that helps us be resilient, although I think it can be frustrating to have to be resilient. Like, why can't things just be easier? I think that there are families who are struggling, and when you add COVID on top of it, you have children with lead poisoning, you know, living with the effects of lead poisoning that are having some difficulties in school. And then you have to, for their own safety, move to virtual learning environments. And so there's these challenges that people are living with right now. And I'll just share this. Like I got an autoimmune. I don't know if you can kind of see my arm. Mm-hmm. I got an autoimmune disease that came out of the water crisis. And I don't know if it's the water itself or the stress of it, but I have psoriasis. And I got COVID in November, and now I have this over like literally 80% of my body. And so, what I'm saying is that people are still living with these effects. You have people still dealing with the skin issues. And it may be at a deeper level now. It's an autoimmune thing for some people. But I think that we are still in a process of healing. We are still in a process of rebuilding trust in our governmental systems. And we still need all those things that we needed 5 years ago around transparency and a willingness to be open and communicate with the community and do as much as possible so people can heal and feel a sense of normalcy again.
Sure.
And just to add a little bit onto that, if I may.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at Flint in comparative perspective, you might be inclined to say, well, you know, there are a lot of communities that have water issues that haven't gotten the same amount of attention and resources and so forth as residents of Flint have gotten. And in the scheme of things, they're pretty lucky from that perspective, and maybe ought to feel, you know, grateful or something. And you know, again, you can see why people say that. There are plenty of other communities that I'm sure deserve the same amount of attention and resources or more. But you know, from the ground level here in Flint, when you talk about the issues that people are continuing to deal with, the justice that hasn't been done, the harm that people have suffered, which goes way beyond lead. I mean, it has to be said, like, Flint has been framed to the world as a lead and water crisis, but it was about much more than that. I mean, we had people die from Legionnaire's disease. And if you look at the charges that were just filed today, the criminal charges, a lot of them pertain to the deaths from Legionnaire's disease in particular. That's where the involuntary manslaughter charges come from. So, you know, I think, you know, one of the things to understand is that, even if you could get every lead pipe out of the ground here in Flint, right, and you're just talking about, water quality, people have other kinds of concerns about, what they may be exposing themselves to with their water. But then beyond that, again, this was not only a water quality crisis for people. It was a crisis of water affordability as well. We still have people who can't pay their water bills, who are getting their water shut off, who are at risk of having liens put on their homes for failure to pay. But zooming out even more, I mean, this was a crisis of political institutions as well. There are a lot of residents here who blame Michigan's emergency manager law for the crisis, because we had people making decisions about water in Flint who were not elected, who were appointed to carry out an agenda that was determined by the state. And so, what's happened at that level with reform? I mean, the answer is nothing. We have an emergency manager law on the books still that has not changed. So when you hear people from Flint saying that they're not taking us seriously, despite all of the energy and resources and so forth that have been invested, this is the kind of stuff that they're talking about. That's not just a product of trauma. It's not just that people are determined to be victims and have, developed an entitled attitude, or that they're walking around with anti-science ideas and they're just not willing to accept that everything is fine now. There's a lot of complexity when you really dig into it in terms of what this crisis means to people, how it's affected people, and what it would ever mean to be over. It's not just a matter of lead service lines.
Yeah. Well, Ben and Jared and Mona, I really appreciate all this perspective. I mean, I know there's so much to talk about, but I feel like you shared a lot today in this episode. I appreciate it a ton. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Travis, for the opportunity to share a story as well.
Thanks, Travis.
Right.
Thank you, Travis.
Waterloop, waterloop, waterloop.
Thanks, everyone, for listening to today's episode. A special thanks to Waterloop supporters Spring Point Partners and the Walton Family Foundation. The Waterloop podcast is sponsored by High Sierra Showerheads, the smart, stylish way to save energy, water, and money while enjoying a powerful shower. Save 20% with promo code WATERLOOP at highsierrashowerheads.com. Waterloop is also sponsored by Flume, the smart water monitor that tracks your home's water use in real time and provides data on your smartphone. Save 10% with promo code WATERLOOP at flumewater.com. If you like Waterloop, please subscribe to the YouTube channel or your favorite podcast platform. Follow us on social media and visit waterloop.org to sign up for updates.
You're in the water loop.